I guess 5 years ago, when I was recently drop kicked out of Washington, best thing that ever happened to me though, I was a little closer to the pulse of what goes on in politics. And 5 years later, it almost feels like I was never in Washington. But it is true, what I said back then about sowing the seeds of rigid dogma is now beginning to flourish and blossom. And it's not a positive thing. It's like an invasive species. And that invasive species has taken over, to a large extent, the spotlight of politics in America. That rigid dogma does fragment, and you use the word, it fragments, splinters, fractures a society in I'm right and you're wrong. That monstrous certainty that is a partner of rigid dogma does not open up enough room for a conversation, for a dialogue, for curiosity, for imagination. It doesn't open the future for a diverse society. It shuts it down. So the kind of rigid ideology that we're seeing in some portions of the Republican Party is not a good. It's not a good way to run a country. It's not a good way to run a community. It's not a good way to run a family, because it reduces and confines the mind to a small segment of this rigid ideology.
So we more or less sacrifice the greater good by addressing things like climate change and Planned Parenthood only with negativity and disdain and ideology.
Children don't learn from negativity. Children don't learn when things are overly rigid. Now, we know we want children to have discipline, we want them to be orderly, we want them to be responsible citizens. But if all they get is rigid, confining, narrow dogma, framed with negativity, their sense of curiosity and imagination and their own nature cannot blossom or prosper. The reason America is such an extraordinary nation, country, it's vibrant and viable, is because we have this extraordinary amount of tolerance for diversity of opinion. And that's if you talk about anything that's in the Constitution and the Founding Fathers, the Constitution was made for people with fundamentally differing views. That's Oliver Wendell Holmes, a justice of the Supreme Court. No truer words were ever spoken. The Constitution was made for people that have different opinions. And as a result of that, if you ever wanted to frame a nation that couldn't be framed, that was viable and vibrant because of its diversity of opinion and its curiosity and its imagination and human nature blossomed, that's why we are the way we are. And if you bring that down to one particular conjecture of an individual ideology, you shut all that off. And so America needs to break free of the chains of narrow-minded thinking and move forward. Only fools jump in where angels fear to tread. My mother used to tell me that all the time. So before you formulate your opinion, sometimes very rapidly, without a lot of information, I mean, seriously think about that. You form this opinion about Planned Parenthood because some group says it's a terrible organization that all they do is perform horrible abortions and sell the body parts of infants. If that's all you know about Planned Parenthood, then you should look a little bit further to see what the Planned Parenthood organization does beyond that. And then, and I would strongly suggest that you look at what Planned Parenthood does. Then just think about Planned Parenthood. It's out there to help families. It's there to help parents. It's there to help mothers. It's there to help children. So if you specifically don't like the Planned Parenthood that you hear about, then find out what you can do in your community to help people who don't have the means, temporarily or otherwise, to help themselves in nurturing their children. But the key word here is planned. I remember I was in the Marine Corps, but I did like one thing that the Army used to say, because I knew my brother was in the Army. Prior planning prevents poor performance. So planned. And most people are in need of a little advice once in a while. Most people could use a little help once in a while. Most people could use a little help in their planning, especially if they're going to have children. So Planned Parenthood right off the bat should be a positive notion in anybody's mind, how you can help your family and your neighbors to plan a better life. So, you also mentioned climate change. So just try to pretend that your children or grandchildren need you as a source of information. And you want your children or grandchildren to be very successful in their life. And you know that they need a good education. So take on this project with your children or grandchildren and try to understand the science behind climate. How does climate work? Why is it cold in the North Pole, hot around the equator? What causes the wind to blow? Why is it hot some places? Why are there droughts some places? Why is there a desert? Find out about how the climate works, about how weather works, and then take the leap from there to see if you and your children can do some research on climate change or global warming. Do it together. Don't be quick to react in a negative way that it doesn't exist, because it's only those liberal socialists that think humans can affect the climate. When in fact, human beings are now a geologic force, and we are affecting the planet with all the things that we do. So research this and be a little bit curious and open-minded. Use the scientific method. Try to be a good mentor for your children. And me, if I watch the news too often, oh my God, you just get, you see murders in Baltimore, horrible things in the Middle East, tens of thousands of immigrants trying to make their way into Europe. You just see, cities burning, drought, forest fires. A lot of terrible things are going on in the world. You can't change that. But I have a tendency to get a little down once in a while that there's no future. But we have this environmental center out here at Turner's Creek, where we get all the kids from Kent County from the 2nd through the 10th grade. And this week, we've had 3rd graders. And let me tell you, spending the day with 20 or 30 or 40 3rd graders, I don't know how the teachers do it every day, that changes my mind about America. Because these kids come out here, they're healthy, they're bright, they're energetic, they're curious, they got their hands and their minds and their ears and their eyes, and they're ready to go. And they're thrilled with picking up little tiny shrimp or fish in the water, to making mountains so a place looks like Maryland, from the mountains to the Piedmont to the coastal plain, to walking in the forest and picking up mushrooms or toads or snakes or whatever. These kids don't stop from the time they get here to the time they leave, and they're energetic. And their wonders of curiosity are just bubbling over. So today, when we were done, I said, we don't have to worry about America. We have what it takes. And why do we have what it takes? Because this is a place where we don't nail the kids to a particular ideology in the classroom. We want them to learn. We want them to use their skills, their imagination, to let their natures, their individual natures, pour forth to a career as a carpenter or a truck driver or a geomorphologist, which is a scientist that studies the shapes of things on the earth, which is one of the things that we learned today. But these kids just filled us with energy about the future, because they're so energetic and they're so curious. Projections of the political scene, I think it's always darkest before the dawn. My grandfather used to tell me that. And that was a metaphor for, yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning, it's pretty dark outside. But if you get a little discouraged, just pick yourself up. There is a dawn after that dark. And find somebody to talk to. And so I think, because I teach kids out here all the time, I think this new generation is so powerfully positive and energetic, in spite of all the cell phones and the computers and the television stuff and all that stuff. These guys are ready to go. So let's lead them down this, not the garden path, but a path that's filled with information, education, so that they can be competent, informed, have integrity, and this nation is going to continue to prosper in spite of these debates from either the Republicans or the Democrats, which sometimes discourages us. Let me tell you, the future's bright, and we can tackle these terrible problems that we see in the news.